corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So at the end of this video, you will be able to solve corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Two triangles are congruent if and only if there is correspondence between the vertices of the triangle such that the corresponding angles are congruent and the corresponding sides are congruent. Simply to say, if two triangles are congruent, then the corresponding parts are congruent. And the other way around, if the corresponding parts of two triangles are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. Given triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle MNL, what is the measure of angle M? Since triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle MNL, therefore, the corresponding parts of the two triangles are congruent. So in order for us to determine the measure of angle M, we should identify first what corresponds to angle M. So angle M of triangle MNL corresponds to angle X. And angle M is congruent to angle X. So therefore, let's look for the measure of angle X, and that will be the measure of angle M. Based on the given figure, angle X, or the measure of angle X, is equal to 33 degrees. Therefore, the measure of angle M is also equal to 33. Let's try another example. Given triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle MNL, what is the measure of segment YZ? So first, let's identify D corresponds to the given segment. So we have segment YZ corresponds to, this is YZ, corresponds to segment NL. So since they are corresponding to each other, we can also say that segment YZ is congruent to segment NL. So in order for us to determine the measure of segment YZ, we need to look for the measure of segment NL. Why? Because segment YZ, or the measure of segment YZ, is equal to the measure of segment NL. And based on the given figure, segment NL is equal to 12. Therefore, segment YZ is equal to 12. Another, in the diagram, the triangle ITP is congruent to triangle NGO. Find the measure of angle N. So again, we have triangle ITP congruent to triangle NGO. Let's look for the parts of triangle ITP corresponds to angle N. Since this is angle, it corresponds also to the given angle. So we have angle N corresponds to angle I. And since they are congruent, the corresponding parts are congruent. So angle N is congruent to angle I. So in order for us to find the measure of angle N, since angle N is congruent to angle L, and we all know that the measure of angle N is equal to the measure of angle I. So let's look for the measure of angle I in order for us to get the measure of angle N. So based on the given figure, this is angle I, and the measure of angle I is 65 degrees. Therefore, the measure of angle N is equal to 65. Given in the diagram, triangle ITP is congruent to triangle NGO. Find the measure of segment OG. So in order for us to identify the segment OG, we need to identify first what corresponds to segment OG in a triangle ITP. So we have OG, or segment OG corresponds to segment PT. So PT. So then YPT, because O corresponds to P and G corresponds to T. Since the two triangles are congruent, the corresponding parts of the given triangles are congruent. So segment OG is congruent to segment PT. Since the two segments are congruent, we can say that the segment or the measure of each segment are equal because because of the definition of congruent segments. So congruent segment states that if two segments are congruent, then the two segments are equal. Now let's look for the measure of segment PT. Segment PT, this one, measures 11 units. Therefore, segment OG is equal to 11. So we have the same diagram. Let's look for the value of Y. So the value of Y is in what angle? So we have angle O. Let's identify first the corresponding parts. So angle O corresponds to angle P. To solve for the measure of angle O, we all know that angle O is congruent to angle P, and we can say that the measure of angle O is equal to the measure of angle P. Now let's substitute the value. The measure of angle O is equal to 6y minus 14 equals the measure of angle P is 40. So we can solve for the value of y algebraically. We have 6y, negative 14 transpose equals 40, negative 14 if we transpose positive 14. 6y equals 40 plus 14 is equal to 54. To solve for the value of y, we divide both sides by 6. Y is equal to 54 over 6, or 54 divided by 6 is equal to 9. Therefore, the value of y is equal to 9. Another example, given the triangle RST is congruent to triangle XYZ. Find the value of n. The value of n is in the angle y. Angle y corresponds to, let's check. So that will be corresponds to angle S. And since the two triangles are congruent, the corresponding parts are congruent. Meaning to say, angle y is congruent to angle S. And since they are congruent, we can say that the measure of angle y is equal to the measure of angle S, because of the definition of congruent angles. So definition of congruent angles states that if two angles are congruent, therefore they are equal. And the other way around, if the two angles are equal, therefore they are congruent. Now let's substitute for the value of y. The measure of angle y is 2n plus 10 equals the measure of angle s is 50. Now solve for the value of n. We have 2n equals 50. Transpose positive 10, it will become negative 10. 2n equals 50 minus 10, that will be 40. To solve for the value of n, we divide both sides by 2. So n is equal to 40 divided by 2, that will be equal to 20. So n is equal to 20. Let's try this. Given triangle CTA is congruent to triangle SPU. Complete the following statement. Number 1, angle T is congruent to, so this is T, angle T corresponds to angle P. Therefore, angle T is congruent to angle P. Next, segment CT is congruent to, so this is segment CT, corresponds to segment SP. Therefore, segment CT is congruent to segment SP. Let's look for the measure of angle U. Angle U corresponds to angle A. Therefore, angle U is congruent to angle A. And the measure of angle U is equal to the measure of angle A. So since the measure of angle A is 40 degrees, therefore, the measure of angle U is 40 degrees. Next, let's look for the measure of segment US. So segment US is congruent to, so we have US, therefore, it is congruent to segment AC. And what is the measure of segment AC? Based on the given figure, that is 10. Therefore, the measure of SU or US rather, that is 10. Let's try this last example. Given triangle DAR is congruent to triangle WIN. Complete the following statement. So we look for the measure or the value of x and the measure of WI. So here is the x variable. We have DA. Segment DA is equal to segment WI. Now let's solve for the value of x. DA, substitute. DA is equal to 5x minus 11 equal to WI is equal to 3x plus 5. Solve for the value of x. Transpose 3x. We have 5x. 3x transpose negative 3x equals, bring down 5. Transpose negative 11. So it will become positive 11. Simplify. 5x minus 3x, that is 2x, equals 5 plus 11, that is 16. So to solve for the value of x, we divide both sides by 2. Then x is equal to 16 divided by 2, that is 8. Now to solve for the measure of WI, WI is equal to 3x plus 5. So substitute the value of x in order for us to get the measure of segment WI. 3 times 8 plus 5. 3 times 8, that is equal to 24, plus 5, that is 29. So segment WI is equal to 29 units. So that's it. I hope you learned something from the video.